Okay, welcome back, everybody, to Learning Happy Hour. My name is Patrick Branley. I'm a senior technical trainer with Palo Alto Networks, and with me is Mitch. Mitch, go ahead and introduce yourself.
Hi, everybody. Mitch Densley, systems engineer at Palo Alto Networks. Good friend of Patrick, so happy to be on the show again.
I'm glad to have you. Yeah, we've been each other a while now, haven't we?
Yeah.
So what we're going to talk about today is preventing threats from the news. So think about it.
Can I share something before we get into that, though?
Oh, yeah. Yeah, go ahead.
You know, Patrick, when we would hang out back in the day, the good old days, all this pre-pandemic, right?
Right.
We used to talk about how, we're trying to lose weight and you're doing better at it than I am and whatnot. But one of the things we were doing was like drinking sparkling water. And it was a hurdle for me to get into that because the flavors were always terrible or, not at all like advertised. And I came across one recently that
Okay.
I have to share. And it'll surprise you. It is root beer flavored sparkling water, 0 calories. And I'm not doing like a plug for Kroger or anything, but
Yeah,
if
they're
you
not
want to
paying
get
us.
some really good root beer flavored water that tastes just like, well, really close to the real thing without any of the sugar, it's in the soda aisle and it's just Fizz and Co. So, there's your little PSA on weight loss and a sparkling water that tastes decent like a soda.
Very nice. Good to know, because I've been drinking the A&W Zero Sugar, which tastes awesome, but probably not as healthy.
Probably got the aspartame that puts holes in your brain or something.
Exactly, something like that.
Yeah.
So I don't know if I do this show long enough, people will be able to,
They'll
measure,
see your weight
measure my
fluctuations.
descent into madness, right? So
Happens to all
anyway,
of us.
so we'll go with your recommendation. That's Fizz and Co. root beer flavored, and then don't worry about mine. So,
one evening recently, I was out in my yard on my phone, reading the news, drinking my Fizz and Co. And I came across this news article on Bleeping Computer. And so this is a shameless plug for them. I have no
Okay.
affiliation with them, but I find that they do a decent job at writing up articles about, things that are going on out in cyberspace and other things, but the cyberspace ones really interest me. And they were talking about this ransomware, this quantum ransomware. And, I was like, there's a million kinds of ransomware out there. What's so special about this one? And I started seeing Speedy and Quickly and Little Time. I was like, what is that? It's a really quick spreading piece of malware that can totally lock up a network in less than 4 hours, right? So
Okay.
that's super scary because you might have, just gone home for the day. And by the time your alarms start going while you're making dinner or whatever, you realize, oh, we got something bad going on at the office. And it's all locked up before you have a chance to even respond. So, that's obviously bad. And you want to prevent that kind of ransomware infection as much as possible. And as I was reading through the article, the initial vector, right, is a phishing email.
Right.
And as so many are, and the phishing email contains an ISO file, which I found to be really, really odd because, ISO files, we in IT, we use them. And
Sure. Yeah.
most people, your corporate citizens don't probably know what an ISO file is. And so that's probably why this works as an attack vector is they'll take the malware, make it an attachment, send it to you with instructions on how to maybe mount it or open it up in some way. And the unsuspecting users just do so, right? And then they get Cobalt Strike, and then Cobalt Strike establishes C2, and then quantum ransomware comes down, and it's a bad day for everybody.
Right.
And I got thinking, who is allowing ISO files in email? And
Yeah, that's kind of what I was thinking. But also, I just want to go circle back a little bit too. Is a bit of work to mount an ISO file. I mean, not a ton, but it makes you wonder too, like, why are you clicking on these things? But
yeah, exactly. Like
the instructions are there, like, oh, they're telling me how to do it. I should go do this. But
yeah,
apparently it's working. So
well, people are very motivated by the free $5 Amazon gift card if you just open up this ISO file and then run this thing and type in this password and then lock up the corporate network, and maybe you'll get your $5 Amazon card. But that carrot that they dangle out there is pretty I guess it's super tempting because a lot of
$5
people.
is $5, right?
Yeah.
So,
So I got thinking, about ISO files in general, and I thought, well, this ought to be an easy thing to use the firewall to do some file blocking.
right,
And I went and first into my data or file blocking profile, and I created this profile, right? And I'm just calling it the iced ID malware. And the whole iced ID is kind of a harkening back to when the malware was originally built for like the financial sector and whatnot.
right,
That's where its name is still sticking around. But I came in and I just added some applications, some app IDs that carry email, right? So IMAP, SMTP, and then a couple web-based ones. And then I identified the file type of ISO. And I said, you know what, in any direction, no one needs to be emailing an ISO file. And I set that in, and then I went to go test it. So, you can read up on the Bleeping Computer article, and they make a call out to DFIR report, which is a pretty awesome publication as well. These guys go really deep, at least deeper than I'm used to, into the piece of malware and how it's distributed, and what all it does, and the different stages of the attack and whatnot. And then, kind of in reading through this article, I decided to go over to Malware Bazaar, and here you can do a search for the hash file, or you can pop in like the name iced ID. So I used one of the hashes and came across, the iced ID tag here, and you can grab a sample file. Now it will be a password protected zip file. So that, and this is where, my security practitioner hat on, I don't love this. It's good and it's bad, right? As
right,
a security researcher, putting this in a password protected zip means that I can get the file and I can put it onto a sandbox, or I can put it into,
right,
a VM where I feel comfortable running it and seeing what it does. But the reason why they password protect it is so that it can go through a network firewall, because network firewalls don't all have file blocking, and people who have file blocking in their capability set, they don't always add on the file types that are encrypted. So just a shameless plug for encrypted types of files, and there are many of them, and your firewall cannot look inside any of these types. So it's in your best interest to create profiles like this, right? Where you're identifying the encrypted ones, and then where a particular user does not need an encrypted version of one of these files, I would set the action to continue, right? Or block, so that that file can't be sent to Susan in finance, for example.
right.
However, threat researchers, we need to be able to grab these things. And so you might have multiple profiles that you apply to different security rules, yada, yada, yada. I'm off track. The point is, right, always think about those encrypted file types. And so in my testing, I did download the file. I tried sending it through, what's not FileZilla, what is it? Thunderbird. Yeah, the email from Firefox or from Mozilla. And what's interesting is my firewall, it did not see the ISO file. Even though I grabbed the sample, even though, I put it into an ISO file, it did not see the ISO file. And upon some thinking about it, having been a CD burner, right, way back in my history,
Sure.
there's lots of ways you can build and burn an ISO and a CD,
All
and
above
different
board, I'm
types of
sure, right?
coding. So there are limits. Yeah. Oh, you did that too? You burned CDs in the past?
Oh, yeah, a few.
A few,
So,
yeah, music, whatnot. So
I
anyway,
know, I'm just joking at the idea, like, and they were all totally legal, so yeah, it's fine.
yeah, totally.
Yeah.
We were kids once, right?
Sure.
So I went to my data filtering log. This is where both data filtering and file blocking log entries end up. And I created a filter string, looking for the thread ID type of ISO file. And these are the actual .iso files as the firewall detects them. And I didn't see all the ISOs that I had downloaded, in recent history. And so I also threw in this filter for file name contains .iso. And you
Okay.
can see here, like my Ubuntu ISO,
Right.
fairly legitimate kind of file,
Sure.
does not get detected as an ISO file by the Palo Alto Networks firewall. So something about the way that file was encoded caused it not to be identified, or attributed appropriately to ISO. So the firewall sees it as an unknown binary. And I was kind of bummed. I'm like, darn it, I can't use this to block the spread of iced ID malware, right?
Right.
But then
right.
I got thinking, wait a minute, when do you want to allow an unknown binary file in email? I don't feel like
I can't
unknown
imagine.
binaries or very many file types should
Yeah,
be
exactly.
transported in email at all.
Pretty
So
limited. So
yeah.
yeah.
So I went back, and I just tweaked my profile. I said, you know what, when it is an unknown binary and it's in these email protocols, let's just go ahead and deny that also.
Sure.
I feel pretty comfortable, right, blocking it in that way. And it did catch the initial download of the ISO file in the email. Do know that you probably are going to need decryption to make this actually effective, so that the session's not, SSL encrypted. We can see inside of it and then spot the file, whether it's an unknown binary or an ISO. And then obviously you have to have this profile assigned to a security rule in order to block it.
Of course.
And it's fun, right, to go read up on the different publications out there and see what's, in the news right now, and really apply your brain smarts to, how do I take this threat that Bleeping Computer's telling me about and protect against it on my security tool set, like a next-gen firewall.
Right.
And
So
what this really drives
go ahead.
me to want to show you all is Unit 42. So
All
this
right,
is
before you do though, let me just
Yeah.
circle back here a second, because there's a bunch of things that you just brought up. So first and foremost, going into being able to download the file itself, right? So they took the extra step of adding a password, right?
Yeah.
And that
Oh,
was
you're
all-
talking about the
all
file
bizarre,
here.
yeah.
Yeah,
And-
and very likely the phishing email had some instructions and potentially a password on grabbing the sample or the file out of the ISO. I mean,
Right.
it's all things that people do or attackers do to obfuscate the file just enough that your normal tools can't spot it, and the human I can dupe into, closing whatever gap is there.
Right. And I think so when because even wildfire, well, you can download the sample. And the thing is that they obviously, companies they can't go in and start adding these extra layers of security to keep the average person from downloading. The average person probably isn't going to download, but somebody might go ahead and do that. And so the point I'm making is that the onus is on the security operators to be able to make sure things like that just don't happen, that anybody can go do that. So it's not the companies or whoever is providing this file, in the case like this where you can download a sample. It's not their fault if that sample does some harm to your network. It's your fault for letting that be a possibility, right? And that sounds harsh, but it's true. So the onus is to make sure we do that. The second thing was just watching you go through this, right? You're working this problem out. And this is something we see quite a bit overall. In fact, in some of the, like in the troubleshooting course, it's something we cover. And that is, first of all, decryption is going to be very, very important, right? Obviously, you've got to have the visibility. But the fact of the matter is that decryption itself doesn't necessarily give you the visibility you need. And you could only use, let's say, one thing like a file blocking, or I'm looking at URL filtering. Sometimes it takes multiple profiles to really attack the problem, right? It might even be a matter of data patterns and things like that. And you really have to do the work to drill down. And so what you were just doing was, well, wait a minute, why doesn't it stop this particular file? Why is it seeing it as an unknown binary? So the work has to be done. And then what we're talking about too is going into the news and looking at things, right? You should be doing some kind of detective work, or have some kind of software or third-party service or whatever that's going to help you be aware of these threats. Because you're talking about too, a 4-hour window where you could lose your whole network. That seems like 4 hours seem like a lot of time, but you talk about it, you go home, you're doing your own thing, you get that email, maybe you didn't actually check the email, and then you see the email, it's 10 p.m. and you're like, oh, well, too late now. So yeah, there's all kinds of, I guess what we're pointing out here is a little bit of, there needs to be legwork. There needs to be work done, and you're not just going to rely on, let's say a best practice setup or a day one setup. You need to really dig deep. So I like how you kind of just illustrated your process of drilling down deeper and deeper and finding how to handle that threat.
Yeah, thank you. I mean, if you look at the date and timestamp on this sample, right, it is very recent. I mean, we are obviously a month after this, but you can't set and forget any security tool. And anyone who says you can, it is either not telling you the truth, or the tool does so little to protect you that, yeah, you can set it and forget it, but the kinds of threats it's going to block are ones that don't change. And as you see here, attackers are constantly evolving their attack strategy. And if you're not spending time putting in the work, as you say, trying to make sure your posture and your policy as hardened as possible, there's going to be holes and sneaky little vectors in which they can get stuff past your defenses. And we very much feel the best defense is a layered defense, right? Zero trust is something that we espouse all the time. And so a firewall is one layer of your multiple defenses. There's endpoint protection, there's cloud protection, there's DLP, there's file blocking. You know, all of these different components need to work together in concert. And we're going to talk next in our next video a little bit more about how you can orchestrate. And I'm not going to give anything away, but it's going to be a lot of fun to see how we can help you automate. I'm just going to leave it there, because
just leave it there.
Yeah.
So this is part one for everybody watching. There will be a part two.
Exactly.
Oh, anyway, so you were showing us Unit 42. So
so to kind of to reset the, you can go read all the bleeping computers out there, but if you're not intimate with how various attacker tactics work, what their TTPs are, and even the technology at play in an attack, you may not know or be able to, draw the dotted line between, all right, this is the vector and this is the prevention for that same vector. Our threat research team, Unit 42, don't panic, has very much taken their expertise and whittled it down into actionable things that you can do to protect against various types of threats. So we call them ATOMs, and I'm probably going to butcher the acronym, but I'm pretty sure it's like actionable threat objects and mitigations, I think is what it stands for. And as you see, we've got several of these all broken down and sorted and filterable by industry, region, type of malware, etc. This one, top left, is new, right? It's very much being talked about by folks out there on the web, because there are remote code execution attacks going on against these devices. And so we give you a little bit of information, on what the campaign is, if it's known who the threat actor is, or at least their kind of colloquial reference. And then as you get down here, you can see the stages of various attack chains or kill chains, and so we start with the MITRE attack one by default, but there are other kind of kill chains you can reference. And these are the various stages. Almost always starts with reconnaissance and then moves down into, like initial access or execution, and eventually gets down into the ugly, your owned stage down there. But on the initial access stage here, you notice we've got 4 indicators that we can kind of drill into. And you can see that they're scanning from specific source address ranges, right? Well, notice up here these courses of action that you could take, and they're broken down by either product or security ingredient, right? So under the next gen firewall, make sure you've got security policies denying traffic to and from those IPs that were known malicious. And this is where you might want to subscribe to threat intelligence feeds. There are many out there that are free, like the DShield 20. It's a great one that I use. There's some decent ones on GitHub that you can even find. And then some that are very, very efficiently curated and accurate and reputable. And you can pay and subscribe to those and then bring them into your firewalls and EDL, external dynamic list, and then obviously, match it in a rule and allow or deny accordingly. Other things like making sure you don't have a service of any, right? Definitely rely upon applications, as we're pointing out down here, and then make sure that the application in question is only being used on its default ports. And if it's using something other than the default, that you know why it's doing that, and you've sanctioned it, and you've got a rule dedicated for that on its unique service. So these may sound like obvious things, but these simple acts can be very effective at blocking that piece of malware or that attack. And when you get into threat prevention, we've got security or signatures that are able to detect that threat. And as long as you've got a vulnerability protection profile on your rule that's allowing traffic, you should be good, right? But don't just put all your eggs in a single basket. Do all of the above, right? In case there's a little configuration gap here, you've got this looking for it. And if this doesn't catch it, well, we can help you automate, keyword, right, for next episode. The orchestration of this component, this tool, they work together, they do this thing, and then they hand off, or they trigger another workflow over here, etc. So you don't have to do all this right in the moment. You can pre-plan some stuff and let the machines, work at machine speed, and definitely block the threat in less than 3 hours so your whole network doesn't get locked up. And there's a lot of these atoms out there. It's easy to find at our unit42.palotonetworks.com. Find one that's of interest, or even better, find your industry, right? Patrick's in education. So, these are the campaigns that have been targeting education institutions. Drill in on one that, like Microsoft Exchange. Let's go back to that one. That one was very, very fun. I mean, not fun, sorry. Very, very applicable to a lot of people. And so relatable. And you can see when we get down in here, right, we've got, okay, like this command to shell. We might have some course of actions. Nope, no course of action I can take on the firewall, right? Because this is more OS specific. Sure. And not even a course of action I could use on like an endpoint protection product. But when I get into the web shell itself, right, let's see what we got here. Lots of different indicators and several courses of action you can take in, using your firewall. And look, some of these things seem very similar to previous atoms we've seen before, because it's effective if you only do it. It might be work, right? But as you said, it's work that's worth putting in the time for, because we've seen 2 different threats right now, and both have the same next-gen firewall mitigation. So obviously people are getting hit by this because they're not doing the recommendations that we see here. And so this is kind of a call to action. Hey, take the time, do a little research from these atoms. And if you get stuck, reach out to your friendly neighborhood trainer or systems engineer. We can help you get through it.
It was just something that I would remind myself and others of, is that there's always somebody smarter, and there's always somebody who works a lot harder. And when you get both of those, they tend to get paid pretty well by bad actors. So their motivation is pretty high. But there was another thing too, is I was noticing that the Tesla there in the list, it was up in the primary list there, I think. Yeah, top, where was it? Oh, I forget. Anyway, there it was.
Agent Tesla, yeah.
Yeah, so I just saw the email about that today, Unit 42 update. And so another thing too is just, even if you're not necessarily going to go and take a look every day, subscribe to these different services, whether it's Unit 42 or some other else, to get those updates, to get the alerts, to know what's going down. Because the F5 one, just saw that was like the top one right there. And there's just a bunch of things going on. And did you know about it, right? And even if you are doing the basics, that's great. But as we just illustrated, sometimes the 1 or 2 solutions aren't the final solution for it, because you need to have multiple vectors to be able to protect yourself. And so that is something else that you might think you're pretty well protected, you're pretty good at it. And then it turns out, oh, it's doing something you didn't expect. So again, it goes back to the work and the legwork and everything else.
Yeah. And, one thing I'll key off of there, be curious, right? Like this DLL sideloading for privilege escalation. I wonder if this is the same one that I was reading about. Yeah, look right there. So this is a different DLL than I've seen used in other kinds of attacks, right? This is the log hours, but there's another attack I was reading about, similar probably from Bleeping Computer, where the attackers use the Windows update process and service to distribute or grab malware. And they did it by sideloading a different DLL that's associated with the Windows update program. And they were getting malware on via that very legitimate process that runs with high privileges. And many anti-malware and endpoint protection products just ignore that process because it does a lot of things and it runs kind of as root and can be noisy. So they ignore everything from it. But if that DLL's been compromised, then it'll go completely unnoticed, depending on what endpoint protection tool you have. So yeah, these are stinking. They're smart, and unfortunately, they're smart, and they're abusing something that was designed to be used one way in an illegitimate way, and it's crafty, and we just got to be as crafty or craftier.
Sure. And the good news is that there are very smart people who are doing the legwork, and they present it in websites like this. So
Yeah.
if you are just being consistent about looking into what's going on, you don't have to be the one that goes and finds the threats and finds the patterns, but you can benefit from those who do.
Yeah,
so
exactly right.
So and that Unit 42, obviously we're going to be partial to that, but they are really good. Actually,
yes, they are.
I was going to wear that shirt today, but I guess it's in the wash. But they aren't the only ones, and there is that cooperative out there to share this kind of information. So as you saw, even in this video alone, we're looking at different sources for information and getting seeing some pretty interesting patterns and things of that nature.
If I may make one more shameless plug, Unit 42 just recently put out one of their yearly threat reports. And we're talking about it with customers now. So it's a great read. It's not terribly long, not quite as long as the Verizon Data Breach Investigation Report, but both are excellent publications. There are other very reputable organizations out there: Cisco's Talos, Spider Labs, Naked Security from Sophos. Each one seems to have their different focus area of expertise. Like the checkpoint threat intelligence folks will focus on malware for mobile devices, right? And it makes sense coming from Israel, and we know about the NSO group and what they're doing with their Pegasus malware tracking journalists, leaders of various countries. I think the Pegasus malware was, sorry, not Pegasus malware. I think it was Pegasus was on 83% of Iranian, 53% of Iranian population's cell phones. I forget the exact statistic, but we'll put links in the description to other awesome videos, other threat researchers who've written up on malware like Stuxnet and campaigns against different nation states and some of the interesting things going on with NSO group. But the point is, right, different companies and their employees and their customers drive different threat research groups to focus in certain areas. So is there any one you should read better than the other? I don't think so. I think you really want to try and absorb all of it from all of the different, research teams and build your own defensive strategy based on the aggregate of things that apply to you and who's, helping you protect them.
Right, and as you said, the aggregate, you pointed that out even on the Adams site there. What's your industry? What would you be more concerned about based on where like, for example, you said education. Well, education is a whole different thing that things I have to worry about, right? If I was managing, say, university is always traditionally, I always felt bad for university engineers because they have to leave things very open. And because they do, because the free flow of information has to exist, guess what? So does the free flow of threats that wouldn't necessarily be something that I'd have to worry about if I was in government or if I was public, what do you call it, services. And now I can't think of the words. Well, you think about it, gas lines and things like that. We're all in the news last year. And so that kind of thing where it's the It's not services. I can't think what it's called. We're having a good day today.
It's okay. I do not envy the folks working in the education space. Just being transparent with you folks, I think you have a very hard job because you have threats coming from the outside, and then you got a lot of threats on the inside from these students that are
Yes.
very motivated to get past your controls and see how far they can push boundaries. So good for
They
you all
fancy
for fighting the
themselves
good fight.
attackers in their own right, right? So
Yeah.
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 Yeah, I've been to a couple, I'm sure you were too when you were teaching, but I've been to a couple of universities, and you could just the look on their faces, is just like they're kind of tired.
They're so tired.
So yeah. All right. Well, I think that kind of covers what we want to talk about for now. Like I said, we'll have a part 2, and we're going to kind of take what we've learned here and apply it in the automation side of things, not to spoil too much.
Yeah.
But
Thanks you all for watching.
yeah, it's hopefully this helps. And like I said, we'll have a lot of notes there. So I'll have a lot of links, a lot of homework. So, get busy. Right. So,
Yeah.
all right. Well, Mitch, thanks for stopping by and doing this with me. And we'll see you soon.
It's been a pleasure. Take care, everybody.